The late afternoon sun bled across the horizon, spilling red and gold onto the rugged hills. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stumbled along the rocky trail. Her family's wagon had been ambushed hours earlier. Shouts, gunfire, horses scattering into the trees. Somehow she had slipped away in the chaos, her heart hammering with fear, her feet carrying her blindly through the wilderness. By the time silence settled, she was alone. Alone in land that seemed to stretch endlessly, the only sound the dry wind brushing against the grass. Every step forward felt heavier, every breath sharper. Her shoes were scuffed, her hands scratched from pushing through thorny brush. She hadn't eaten since morning and her lips were cracked from thirst. It was then she heard it. Hooves. Her body froze. She crouched behind a boulder, clutching her shawl like a shield. The sound grew louder until the shadow of a horse fell across the ground in front of her hiding place. Slowly, she lifted her eyes. He was Apache, tall and broad-shouldered. He sat astride a paint horse with the ease of one born to the saddle. His hair was long, tied back with a strip of leather, his features sharp against the fading light. He carried a bow across his back, a knife at his side, and his dark eyes swept the land with steady calm before settling on her. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories, whispers around the fire, warnings from her father about the savages. Fear gripped her chest. She pressed back against the rock, ready to bolt, though her legs trembled too much to obey. The Apache dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, unthreatening. He said something in his own tongue, low and steady, but she couldn't understand. Her lips parted, though no words came. When he stepped closer, she stumbled back, nearly tripping over her skirt. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. I don't mean any harm." His gaze softened, though his expression remained unreadable. He studied her for a long moment, then held out a small skin of water. Sarah blinked, uncertain if it was a trick, but her throat burned, and her body betrayed her hesitation. She reached out, her fingers brushing his as she took the skin. The touch jolted her, though he made no move beyond that simple offering. The water was cool, life itself. She drank greedily, then lowered it, shame flickering across her face. "Thank you," she said softly. He gave a single nod. For the next few minutes, silence hung between them, heavy yet strangely steady. He looked at her as if weighing something, then gestured to his horse, pointing toward the horizon where smoke still lingered faintly in the sky, the direction she had come from. His meaning was clear. Danger lay behind her. Sarah's heart twisted. Her family, what if they were gone? The thought nearly buckled her knees. She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting tears, but the Apache stepped back, giving her space rather than crowding her grief. When he finally motioned for her to follow, she hesitated. Trust him? A stranger, worse, one her people called an enemy. Yet the wilderness stretched endless and merciless around her. Alone, she wouldn't survive the night. Swallowing hard, she nodded. He helped her onto the horse, lifting her with surprising gentleness. His hands were strong, steadying her as if she were fragile glass. Sarah felt the warmth of him, the quiet control in his presence. She dared a glance back at his face, only to find his dark eyes already on her. Not cruel, not wild, just steady. Watchful, and for the first time since the ambush, she felt the faintest flicker of safety. The horse moved at a steady pace, its hooves striking the earth with a rhythm that seemed almost soothing compared to the chaos Sarah had left behind. She sat stiffly in the saddle, her hands gripping the worn leather reins though she barely knew how to ride. Behind her, the Apache walked on foot, guiding the horse with a calm confidence, as if the vast wilderness belonged solely to him. Sarah's eyes darted everywhere, the jagged rocks, the tall grasses swaying like silent sentinels, the shadows, lengthening into night. Every rustle in the brush made her heart leap, but the warrior's stride never faltered. His presence was both unsettling and strangely steadying. At last, the sky dimmed into indigo, stars piercing the veil of twilight. The Apache raised a hand, motioning for her to stop. He tied the horse loosely to a mesquite tree and began clearing a small patch of ground with practiced ease. She watched as he built a fire, his hands skilled, movements economical. Sarah hesitated before dismounting. Her legs wobbled when her feet touched the earth, the day's exhaustion catching up to her. He noticed, pausing just long enough to steady her arm before turning back to his work. No words, no lingering touch, just the quiet assurance of someone who knew how to survive. She sat a few feet from the growing flames, wrapping her shawl tightly around herself. The fire crackled, its glow painting shadows on the man's face. He looked older in the flickering light, not with age but with the weight of experience. He set a strip of dried meat before her. Sarah blinked, then glanced at him, uncertain. Her upbringing tugged at her. Never take food from an enemy, her father would have said. But her empty stomach clenched painfully, and the smell was too tempting to resist. She picked it up slowly, chewing carefully. The flavor was foreign, smoky, but it filled the hollowness inside her. "Thank you," she murmured again, her voice low. He met her eyes for a heartbeat, then gave a single nod, just as before. The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the fire. Sarah shifted, hugging her knees to her chest. She wanted to speak, to fill the emptiness with words, but she feared saying the wrong thing. Instead, she studied him cautiously. His hair glistened with firelight, his jaw strong, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if guarding against unseen threats. He seemed carved from the very land, enduring, unmovable. And yet, when the wind lifted, carrying a strand of her hair across her cheek, she thought she saw the faintest flicker of softness in his eyes. Finally, she found her courage. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice almost swallowed by the crackling flames. The Apache turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in deliberate English, accented but clear, he answered, "Alone. You die." The bluntness of his words struck her like a stone. She lowered her gaze, ashamed of her weakness. But something in the way he said it lacked cruelty. It wasn't mockery. It was fact. They sat in silence again. The fire burned lower. The stars thickened overhead. Sarah lay on the hard ground, curling into herself for warmth, though the earth's chill seeped through her shawl. She drifted between sleep and wakefulness until she heard movement. Her eyes opened to see him draping, a heavy blanket, coarse but warm, over her shoulders. She tensed, holding her breath, but he stepped away without a word, settling himself on the other side of the fire. For a moment she stared at the blanket, stunned by the quiet act of kindness. Slowly she closed her eyes again, the fear still coiled in her chest, but now it tangled with something else. An unfamiliar, fragile sense of safety she hadn't expected to find in the hands of an Apache warrior. Morning came slowly, the gray sky peeling back into shades of gold. Sarah awoke to the smell of smoke and the faint sound of movement. For a brief moment she forgot where she was, then the blanket around her shoulders reminded her. She sat, up quickly, clutching it to her chest, her eyes darting across the camp. The Apache was already awake. He crouched near the fire, sharpening a knife with a small stone, his posture relaxed but alert. When he noticed her stirring, he didn't speak. Instead, he set a strip of dried meat beside her and gestured with his chin for her to eat. Sarah hesitated but took it, murmuring a shy, "Thank you." He gave the same small nod as before. The silence between them lingered, but it no longer felt as sharp as last night. She studied him carefully, curiosity beginning to outpace fear. His features were strong, his movements deliberate. Every action seemed purposeful, efficient, as though wasted energy was something he never allowed himself. After they ate, he began preparing the horse again, tightening the straps, checking the hooves. Sarah watched, unsure if she should help or simply stay out of the way. At last, she asked softly, "What is your name?" He paused. For a moment she thought he might ignore her, but then he said, "Dakota." The name rolled from his tongue in a way that felt both foreign and powerful. "Dakota," she repeated carefully, tasting the sound. She expected him to ask her name in return, but he didn't. Still, after a long pause, she added, "I'm Sarah." He glanced at her briefly, his eyes unreadable, before returning to his work. Yet she felt a small sense of victory in getting him to speak. The day's journey stretched long. Sarah rode while Dakota walked beside the horse, guiding them through narrow trails, across shallow streams, and into valleys thick with grass. She found herself stealing glances at him, wondering what thoughts lay behind those quiet eyes. Her mind wandered back to the attack, to her family's screams, the gunfire, the sudden silence. Grief pressed heavy on her chest, but she bit it back. The Apache didn't need to see her weakness. By midday, the heat bore down on them. Sarah's lips cracked, her body weary, but Dakota never seemed to tire. When she shifted uncomfortably in the saddle, he noticed and raised a hand to halt. He motioned for her to dismount, leading her to the shade of a cottonwood tree. They sat, together, the silence wrapping around them again. Sarah traced circles in the dirt with her finger before daring to ask, "Why don't you speak much?" Dakota looked at her, his expression steady. "Words, not needed," he said simply. Sarah almost laughed. The bluntness of it, the certainty, it was so unlike the endless chatter of the people she grew up with. And yet, there was something refreshing in it. He spoke only when he meant to, not wasting air on things that didn't matter. Sometimes, words are needed, she countered gently, her voice softer now. They make people feel less alone. For a moment she thought he might dismiss her, but instead he tilted his head slightly, as if considering. His gaze lingered on her, not unkind but deep, as though he were weighing more than her words. The quiet stretched between them until she looked away, her cheeks warming under his stare. She didn't know why her heart beat faster, but it did. When they continued their journey, the silence felt different, no longer heavy, but thoughtful. Sarah realized she wanted to know more. She wanted to understand the man who had appeared from the wilderness like a storm, but carried himself with the patience of stone. And though she didn't yet dare admit it, she found herself wondering if she could trust him not just with her survival, but with the fragile, aching hope blooming inside her heart. That evening they camped near a shallow creek, the water glimmering silver under the moonlight. Sarah knelt to wash her face and hands, the coolness reviving her after the long day's ride. When she glanced over her shoulder, Dakota was tending to the horse, his broad frame bent in concentration. Even in such a simple task, there was an undeniable strength in him, a presence that made the wilderness feel less frightening. She sat by the fire once more, pulling the coarse blanket around her shoulders. The crackling flames lit his profile as he settled opposite her, silent as always. Sarah wanted to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. She was not used to such silence. Back home there had always been noise. Her father barking orders, her mother sighing, her siblings whispering or arguing. Yet here, the quiet seemed to demand honesty. After a long pause, she whispered, "I don't know if my family survived." Dakota's eyes lifted to hers. For a moment she thought he might look away, but instead, he held her gaze. His voice was low, deliberate. Grief, heavy, but life stronger. The simplicity of his words pierced her more deeply than any long speech could have. Her throat tightened, tears pressing against her eyes, but she forced them back. She had been raised to be strong, to keep composure, and yet, here in the wilderness, with a man her people would have called her enemy, she felt closer to letting go than ever before. The silence stretched again, the night sounds filling it, the whisper of the creek, the call of an owl in the distance. She stared into the fire until her courage finally caught up with her heart. "I've never been kissed before," she blurted, her voice trembling more than she intended. Dakota's head tilted slightly, his dark eyes narrowing. Not in judgment, but in curiosity. Sarah felt her face burn. She twisted the blanket tighter around herself, wishing she could pull the words back. "I shouldn't have said that," she muttered quickly, looking away. "It's silly. I've always been sheltered. My father never allowed me near anyone. He said love was foolish, dangerous." Her voice broke, and she pressed, her lips together, staring hard at the flames. I suppose he was right. For a long time there was no answer. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night air. Sarah's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Then at last, his voice came, soft but steady. "Not foolish," Dakota said. She looked up, startled. His gaze held hers, unwavering. He leaned forward slightly, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Kiss, not foolish. It is truth. Heart." Sarah's breath caught. She couldn't move, couldn't look away. The way he said it, so certain, so unashamed, struck something deep inside her. Dakota shifted closer, not rushing, not forcing, just letting the moment unfold. His hand rested lightly on the ground between them, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "First kiss. First," he murmured, his voice dropping even lower. "Should be slow." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Every instinct told her to retreat, to guard herself. But another voice, the one buried deep within her, begged her to stay. She swallowed hard, her lips parting just slightly. And though he didn't close the distance, she could feel the promise hanging in the air between them, fragile yet powerful. A choice she would have to make, and one she wasn't sure she could ever turn away from. For the first time in her life, Sarah didn't feel like a girl following rules she had never chosen. She felt like a woman standing at the edge of something unknown and breathtaking. The next morning, the forest was alive with birdsong and rustling leaves. Sarah awoke with a quiet awareness, her senses attuned to the soft movements of Dakota as he prepared their breakfast. She watched him, admiring the strength in his hands and the careful precision in everything he did. The firelight danced on his face, revealing a calm, steadfast presence that made her feel safer than she had ever felt before. As she ate in silence, her thoughts drifted to the moments they had shared. The gentle brush of his hand, the first tentative kiss by the fire, the trust they had built through each step of their journey. And now, with the world around them still dangerous, a profound choice rested in her hands. To stay with Dakota and embrace the unknown, or return to the life she had always known, steeped in rules and expectations that had never allowed her heart to flourish. She reached out, lightly brushing her fingers against his as he handed her some dried meat. His eyes met hers, steady, reassuring, and in that instant, she realized she did not want to walk away. Not now. Not ever. "I've made my choice," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "I want to stay with you." Dakota's expression softened, relief and something gentler flickering in his eyes. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he reached for her hand and held it with a warmth that spoke louder than words ever could. "Your heart is brave," he said finally, "and your choice honors both of us. Sarah felt a rush of emotion, a blend of fear, exhilaration, and hope. She had chosen love over certainty, trust over fear, and in doing so, had stepped into a world that was both terrifying and breathtaking. As they continued their journey, Dakota's demeanor remained calm, but there was a lightness to his step, a subtle shift in the way he moved beside her. Sarah noticed every detail, the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, the gentle guidance of the horse, the protective stance he maintained without words. She felt cherished, seen, and safe. That evening, they camped, near a small clearing, the fire crackling between them. Sarah felt an unfamiliar courage swell within her. She turned to Dakota, meeting his gaze. "There's something I need to ask," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He tilted his head. "Curious. What is it?" I want to know more about you," she admitted. "Not just the warrior, but the man beneath. Your life, your dreams, your heart." Dakota's lips curved slightly, the faintest smile playing at the corners. "You wish to know what is seldom spoken?" he asked. "Yes," she said, leaning just slightly closer. "I want to understand you, completely." For a long moment, he regarded her, his eyes thoughtful. Then he lowered himself to sit closer, the firelight illuminating the intensity in his gaze. "Then you will see truth," he said, "and with truth comes trust. Are you ready?" Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. She had faced fear, danger, and the unknown, but this was a test of the heart, a moment that would define their bond. She reached for his hand again, intertwining her fingers with his, drawing courage from the strength she felt there. Dakota's hand tightened around hers gently. "Then begin," he whispered. And so, in the quiet glow of the fire, with the wilderness around them and the stars above, they began to bridge the distance between two hearts, slowly, carefully, building a love grounded not in haste or passion, alone, but in patience, understanding, and the courage to choose each other despite the world's expectations. For Sarah, it was more than a kiss, more than a gesture. It was a promise, the first step toward a life she had never imagined but had always dreamed of. And for Dakota, it was the beginning of a love he had never allowed himself to hope for, yet had always silently waited to find. The forest was quiet that night, the soft hum of crickets and the whisper of leaves the only sounds around their small campfire. Sarah and Dakota sat close, their hands still intertwined, the warmth of their bond more tangible than the flames before them. The journey had tested them both, fear, danger, and doubt. But it had also forged a connection neither could deny. For a long while they simply sat in silence, letting the world fade away. Sarah's heart, once heavy with grief and uncertainty, now felt light with hope and anticipation. She traced circles on Dakota's palm with her thumb, feeling the rough strength beneath her fingers, the solidity of a man who had protected her, not just from harm but from loneliness itself. "I never thought I'd feel like this," she admitted softly. "Safe, wanted, understood." Dakota's dark eyes met hers, their depths revealing both vulnerability and steadfastness. "You are brave, Sarah," he said, his voice low but steady. "You chose your heart. That is strength greater than fear." She smiled, leaning closer. His presence was magnetic, comforting, and utterly grounding. Her first kiss with him, tentative and slow, had awakened something inside her, a longing not just for intimacy, but for connection, trust, and the quiet certainty of being seen. And now, sitting beside him, she felt ready for more, not in haste, but in the slow, deliberate way that had defined everything between them. Dakota's hand lifted gently to brush a stray lock of hair from her face, his fingers lingering for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Sarah's breath caught, and she leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering shut. He did not move closer immediately. Instead, he held the space, letting her decide how to bridge the gap. Finally, she tilted her face toward him, closing the distance between them. Their lips met again, softly, slowly, a kiss that spoke of patience, respect, and the trust that had grown between them. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear, only a shared understanding that this was a beginning, not an end. When they parted, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling, hearts beating in quiet synchrony. Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire, a deep, unshakable knowledge that she belonged here, beside this man who had become her protector, her companion, and the first true love of her life. Dakota's hand traced her jawline, gently. "We begin slowly," he murmured, his lips brushing hers again briefly. "But with patience, we will know everything. Trust, love, and life together." Sarah nodded, tears of relief and joy glimmering in her eyes. "Slow," she agreed, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want it slow, with you." The night stretched on, peaceful and unbroken, the forest around them holding its breath as if giving them this moment. For Sarah, it was more than safety or passion. It was the promise of a life shared with someone who understood her heart completely. For Dakota, it was the culmination of patience, courage, and the quiet hope he had carried, now realized in the form of a love that would endure any challenge. And so, in the stillness of the wilderness, they began their life together, not rushed, not forced, but carefully, deliberately, each moment building upon the last. Every touch, every glance, every word whispered in the firelight became a thread in the tapestry of their love, a slow but unbreakable bond that neither fear nor judgment could undo. Sarah rested her head on Dakota's shoulder, her hand still, entwined with his. "I've never felt this before," she whispered. "Nor I," he replied, his voice a gentle rumble. "And now, we will learn together." In that quiet night, beneath the vast sky of stars, two hearts found each other, fully, brave, patient, and bound by a love that had begun slow, but promised to endure forever. The fire burned low, throwing a soft orange glow across the clearing. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she thought he might hear it. Dakota's words echoed in her chest. First kiss should be slow. She'd never heard anything so simple yet so disarming. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air was heavy with unspoken things, fragile as glass. Sarah lowered her gaze, staring at the blanket bunched in her fists, unsure if she had imagined the gentleness in his tone. She dared a glance back at him and found his eyes still on her, steady, patient, like he had no intention of rushing what was not freely given. Dakota finally shifted, leaning closer, his movements deliberate. His hand came to rest on the ground between them, then slowly, carefully, he turned his palm upward. An invitation. Sarah's throat went dry. Her fingers twitched, trembling with nerves, but something inside her wanted to bridge the gap. Tentatively, she stretched her hand toward his. When her skin brushed his palm, warmth surged through her, startling in its intensity. He didn't close his fingers around hers. He only let their hands rest together, as though he wanted her to feel safe enough to choose. Her eyes lifted to his face. He was close now, close enough that the shadows of the fire traced every strong line of his jaw, close enough that she could feel the faint brush of his breath on her cheek. Sarah swallowed. I don't know how," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Dakota's gaze softened, his eyes flickering with something unspoken. Understanding, perhaps, or patience. "Slow," he reminded, his voice deep, low, a promise as much as a word. He leaned closer, but still left a space between them, waiting. Sarah's pulse raced, her chest rising and falling quickly. At last, with a courage she didn't know she had, she tilted her face toward him. Their lips met. Barely, softly, the faintest brush of warmth. It wasn't like the stories she had heard. It wasn't wild or breathless. It was steady, unhurried, a promise carried in silence. Her eyes fluttered closed, her hand trembling in his. But Dakota didn't deepen the kiss, didn't push. He let it linger only a moment before pulling back, his gaze steady on hers. Sarah exhaled shakily, her heart soaring and stumbling all at once. That was... She trailed off, unable to find words. Dakota's lips curved, not quite a smile, but something softer than she had yet seen on him. "Beginning," he said simply. Her cheeks flushed hot, though the night air was cool. She looked down, trying to hide the sudden warmth flooding her, but she couldn't stop the small smile tugging at her lips. The fire crackled, and for the first time since she had lost her family, Sarah felt something other than grief. She felt alive. They sat together in silence, her hand still resting lightly in his. The world beyond their little circle of fire seemed far away, the grief, the fear, the danger. For that moment, there was only the steady strength of the man beside her and the echo of a kiss that had been more than she had ever dared to imagine. When she finally lay down to rest, the blankets snug around her shoulders, Sarah closed her eyes with a heart that felt both fragile and full. She knew tomorrow would bring hardship and choices she wasn't ready for. But tonight, she carried, with her the certainty of one thing. Her first kiss had not been stolen, but given, slow, gentle, and true. The next morning, Sarah awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the trees. For a fleeting moment, the warmth of last night's fire lingered in her chest, a memory of the gentle brush of Dakota's lips, the steady pressure of his hand. But reality intruded almost immediately. The wilderness was unforgiving, and danger was never far. Dakota was already up, tending the horse with practiced ease. His movements were silent, efficient, as though every task had been perfected over countless mornings. Sarah watched him, noting the sharp focus in his eyes, the way he seemed to feel the land itself beneath his feet. She longed to speak, to ask him about his life, about the man beneath the warrior. But the words felt small, fragile against the weight of the world outside. They traveled quietly through the forest, Dakota leading the way. The silence between them had grown comfortable, a shared understanding that words were not always necessary. Yet with every step, Sarah's thoughts drifted to her family. If they had survived the attack, would they forgive her for trusting an Apache? For leaning into someone her people would have called an enemy? Her stomach tightened at the thought. She had been raised to follow rules, to respect the lines drawn by her father and her community. But here, in the shadow of the wilderness, those rules felt distant, almost irrelevant. What mattered now was survival, and something else she dared. Not name, the fragile thread of connection she had begun to feel with Dakota. Midday brought them to the edge of a small clearing, and Sarah froze. Smoke curled in the distance, faint but unmistakable. Her heart leapt into her throat. Settlers. Her people, or others, seeking to claim her, perhaps with suspicion, perhaps with vengeance. Dakota noticed her pause. "Danger," he said simply, his voice low but steady. There was no fear in his tone, only clarity. "They come." Panic surged within her. "What do we do?" she asked, voice trembling. He turned to her, eyes dark and unwavering. "Stay behind me. Quiet. Do not move." Sarah obeyed instinctively, pressing close to his side as he moved forward, a shadow among the trees. She watched as he scanned the horizon, every muscle taut, every sense alert. His presence was commanding, and for a moment, fear gave way to awe. The settlers appeared at the edge of the clearing, rifles in hand, shouting for her to return. Sarah's heart twisted. These were her people, the ones she had known her whole life, yet she could not move. Dakota's gaze remained fixed, protective, and a strange courage swelled inside her. "Sarah," he murmured, barely audible. "Your choice." Her pulse raced. Return to the world she had always known, obeying her family's authority, or stay with the man who had shown her patience, gentleness, and a new kind of strength. The decision pressed on her like the weight of the wilderness itself. Before she could answer, one of the settlers stepped forward, anger etched on his face. Dakota's hand rested on his knife, steady and calm, his eyes unwavering. The air between them crackled with tension, the fragile bubble of trust and intimacy from last night now under threat. Sarah's heart ached. She had tasted something precious, safety, understanding, even the first spark of love, and the world wanted to tear it away. But as she looked at Dakota, standing firm against the approaching danger, she realized something profound. Her heart had begun to belong to him, and for the first time in her life, she understood that some choices were worth defying the world for. The settlers' shouts grew louder, but Sarah's resolve crystallized. She had to decide, and whatever came next, she would face it with the man who had shown her what it meant to be seen, truly seen. The next days were tense and uncertain. Dakota led Sarah deeper into the wilderness, moving silently along trails only he seemed to know. Each step carried the weight of potential danger, settlers searching for her, wild animals stalking the sow, edges of the forest, and the unknown judgment of his own people. Sarah rode beside him, growing more accustomed to the rhythm of his movements, yet a quiet anxiety lingered in her chest. She had begun to feel a connection, fragile yet undeniable, and the thought of losing him, whether to her people or his tribe, gnawed at her. One evening, as they settled by a riverbank, Dakota's expression grew distant. He cleaned his weapons with methodical care, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his mind elsewhere. Sarah watched him, hesitant to break the silence, until she finally asked softly, "What troubles you?" Dakota paused, his gaze fixed on the flowing water. "My tribe. They will not understand," he said finally, his voice low. "A settler girl. Their law, their ways. They may not accept." Sarah's heart sank. She had known from the start that their bond was fragile, but hearing it spoken aloud made the threat real. "But they don't know me," she said, her voice trembling. "And they don't know you." He turned to her, eyes dark and unreadable. "Even if they do, it is not simple. Their laws, my honor, my duty. I cannot betray that lightly. Yet, my heart, it is already bound." She reached out, brushing her hand against his. The gesture was tentative, but he did not pull away. Instead, he allowed it, as though her touch grounded him in the turmoil within. "The choice," he continued, his voice quieter now, "is mine and yours. But danger follows, and the tribe may call me dishonored for keeping you." Sarah swallowed, the fear and excitement tangled together in her chest. She had always known love could be complicated, but she had never imagined it could be so entwined with duty, honor, and survival. "Then we face it together," she whispered. "Whatever comes, we face it." Dakota's gaze softened, the hardness of the warrior giving way to something more human. "Together," he repeated, as though testing the sound, letting it roll across the river like a promise. The following day, they reached a hidden valley where Dakota's tribe often hunted. As they approached the encampment, Sarah noticed the wary eyes of the warriors, the tense posture, the murmured words. The air was thick with suspicion. Dakota's chest tightened. He had prepared for this moment, but felt the weight of it all, the same. One of the elders stepped forward, scrutinizing Sarah. His eyes flicked to Dakota, then back to her. "Who is this?" he demanded. Dakota straightened, standing tall and resolute. "She is with me," he said simply, his voice carrying the authority of one who had proven himself time and again. The elder's eyes narrowed. "A settler girl? You bring her into our lands. This dishonors us." Sarah's heart raced. She looked at Dakota, fear and hope warring within her. He turned to her briefly, a silent question in his eyes. "Trust me, or turn away." "I trust you," she whispered, her hand finding his. He nodded, stepping forward. "Then we face this together," he declared, his voice steady. The tribe murmured, some in disapproval, others in surprise. Dakota's decision had been made. His heart had chosen, and his honor would bend to protect what mattered most. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and awe. The man beside her, so quiet and steadfast, had faced both the wilderness and the judgment of his own people for her sake. And though the path ahead would not be easy, she realized something profound. Love, when true, demanded courage beyond the fear of the world. That night, as the camp settled and the firelight danced across their faces, Dakota and Sarah sat close. Words were few, but the bond between them spoke volumes. The journey ahead would test them both, but for now they had claimed a fragile victory, the choice to stand together, no matter the cost. The following days were tense, the wilderness no longer just a backdrop, but a crucible testing both their resolve and the bond they had begun to forge. Dakota led Sarah through hidden trails, avoiding the main paths where settlers might be searching. Every rustle in the trees, every distant sound of hooves or voices, sharpened their senses, kept their hearts pounding with vigilance. Sarah rode close to him, growing more confident in the rhythm of travel, yet every step carried unease. She had begun to trust him with her life, but trust was fragile, easily shattered by one wrong move, and she could sense that Dakota carried a heavier burden, a responsibility beyond protecting her, to his tribe and their unyielding codes. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high, they paused by a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley. Dakota dismounted, scanning the land. He knelt, examining tracks in the soil. Sarah watched him, impressed by his keen awareness and silent strength. She felt the urge to reach out, to touch him, but hesitated, remembering last night's tender moment. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice low. "Danger comes from more than settlers. My people. They may not accept our bond. You must understand." "I understand," she replied, her voice steady though her heart raced. "But we chose this together. That counts for something, doesn't it?" His eyes softened, a flicker of warmth in the shadowed depths. "It counts, but it does not make it easy." They continued cautiously, moving through the valley like ghosts. By dusk, they had reached a secluded glade where Dakota decided they would rest. He set up a small camp, arranging firewood with meticulous care. Sarah sat nearby watching him, feeling a mix of admiration and quiet awe. The man who could command the wilderness with such confidence also possessed a patience and gentleness she had never known. As night fell, the sounds of the forest shifted. An owl hooted, leaves rustled, and distant wolves howled. Sarah shivered, the unfamiliar night pressing close. Dakota noticed and moved toward her, placing a blanket over her shoulders. "You do not need to be afraid," he said softly. "I am here." The words, simple yet profound, settled over her like a balm. She looked into his eyes, tracing the lines of his face in the firelight. I feel safe with you," she admitted. Dakota inclined his head slightly, the faintest shadow of a smile touching his lips. Safe, he repeated, as though tasting the word. The moment hung between them, a delicate thread of trust. Sarah's pulse quickened. She wanted to speak more, to confess the feelings building in her chest, but the tension of the wilderness kept her cautious. Instead, she let the silence speak, leaning just slightly closer to him. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from the underbrush. Both froze, eyes locking. Dakota's hand went to his knife, body coiled for action. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat. The intruder emerged, a scout from Dakota's tribe, tense, eyes wide with suspicion. "Dakota!" the man barked, voice urgent. "Who is this girl?" Dakota rose slowly, standing protectively in front of Sarah. "She is with me," he said firmly, his voice carrying authority and calm. The scout's eyes narrowed. "You bring her here? Our laws, our ways?" Sarah stepped slightly forward, her voice trembling but determined. "I am not here to harm. I trust him, and I chose to follow him. That should matter." Dakota's eyes met hers, a silent exchange of understanding. Then, turning to the scout, he said, "This is my choice. Do you understand?" The scout hesitated, glancing between them, before nodding reluctantly. Dakota relaxed slightly, but his hand remained near his knife, ready. Sarah exhaled, a mixture of relief and awe washing over her. Trust had been tested, her trust in Dakota, and Dakota's trust in her, but they had passed. For now. As the fire crackled and night deepened, Sarah leaned closer to him, her hand brushing against his. No words were needed. The bond between them had been strengthened by shared danger, and the knowledge that in each other they had found a protector, a companion, and the beginnings of something deeper than either had expected.